Hmm. Good afternoon. I suppose you're wondering why I've got a banner like this spread out on the decking of my garden. It's not there permanently, but I want to make a point. I love gardens. Anybody that has space and doesn't use it to create a beautiful garden should hang themselves. Some would say that's an extreme view, and we're not extreme people. I'm not. I'm not an extreme person. So let's get on with this. What does it say? Let all technologies evolve. I like the internal combustion engine. There it is, there's an example of it there. Happens to be a Royal Enfield. Quite an economic motorcycle. Single cylinder, loads of miles to the gallon. But I'm also a member of Greenpeace. I'm a Green Councillor. And I publish Mags magazine as well. So am I conflicted? Not in the slightest. Why so? How so? You may ask. Given that our government wants to do away with internal combustion engines completely in the next 5 or 10 years or whatever. I think they are simplifying an issue which is more complex than they give it credit for being. I'm not enthusiastic about electric bikes, so let's be honest. I love engines that go rumpety-rump, brum, brum, and you open the throttle and you feel that deep-throated, not necessarily noisy, but that deep, thunderous pull, as if you're on the back of a grizzly bear and you're hanging onto its fur and it's rushing across the landscape like this. And with each paw landing in the ground, it pulls you forward. Turf flying everywhere, twigs. That's the power delivery of a big V-twin in particular. Do you get that with an electric motorcycle? I don't think so. I've ridden one briefly. No, you are just unaccountably somewhere else. Quite quickly, if it's one of the more high-powered ones. I think there's a place for electric motorcycles, and at the moment that is certainly only in the urban environment, I would suggest, or in a situation where you only need to go a comparatively short distance. So for making long journeys, hundreds, thousands of miles around the world, sometimes in countries that don't have fuel stations, very frequent intervals, is the electric motorcycle viable? Not really. But to be honest, it's not the only reason I'm not enthusiastic. I like grizzly bears, I like gorillas. I don't think gorillas like being jumped on. But a bear, it's a bit more like a horse, isn't it? I have to say, I've never tried. So let's just stick with what I know. Don't put all our eggs in the electric basket. It's as simple as that. Because ultimately, I'm sure the electric propulsion will evolve. Science always evolves. And with AI, it's evolving far faster today than it has ever done in the history of the human race. I think we've only just scratched the surface. I mean, who knows, they might develop batteries that can charge up as quickly as we refuel today with petrol. They may have motorcycles that will travel 1,000 miles on a battery which I could wear on my wrist. Who knows what might happen? But it isn't the situation at the moment. And my feeling is that the greatest reductions in carbon dioxide can be achieved in ways which don't conflict with what I consider to be reasonable appetites and expectations of many people. As far as my car's concerned, I don't care what's under the bonnet, what the form of propulsion is. And I think that's so for 90%, 99% of motorists. But it isn't so of the vast majority of motorcyclists, partly for practical reasons and partly for the emotional appeal of a motorcycle. I've got a Harley Davidson. It's 17 years old now. I may never change it. I can't think why I should have to. It's a brute of a thing. Of course it's bigger than it needs to be. but it isn't particularly uneconomic as big engine bikes go. And you know, if I'm riding until I'm, say, let's 95, so another 22 years, there's no reason why that bike should not be operating. If I sell it, or let's say I take it to scrap and it's melted down, which will be a tragedy in many ways, then the CO2 released in that industrial process, plus the CO2 released in manufacturing a brand new electric bike, so I bought a Zero or a LiveWire Harley Davidson, how many years and how many miles would I have to live and travel in order to square the equation, to make that act a green act? I can't remember, but I've seen figures for this and they're really surprising. Probably at least 50, 60,000 miles, something of that order, before that action makes environmental sense. So by keeping that bike going, I only use it quite sparingly. I don't do more than typically 5,000 or 6,000 miles a year these days. Got a dog. I don't know if you saw him then. Jack, you might like to come and grace us with your presence, dog over there. We'll bring him in later so you can all see Jack. It's better if we focus on the things where massive savings can be made in massive reductions in CO2 production can be made without, we've already said this, haven't we? I don't know if it's obvious, but this is ad lib. But I've turned these ideas over in my head at great length. There's no point in having a war with the green lobby, because fundamentally the aspirations of the green movement are the aspirations of any sane human being. We all live in the environment. Some people might say, the environment? Where's that? I don't live there. Food comes from Tesco's, doesn't it? These are silly people. Should we call them silly people, or should we respect their opinion? No, they're silly. Food does not originate in a supermarket. The earth gives us food. Well, we take it, but it's the provider of everything. Where do we all live? The environment. There is no way around this argument. So if we damage the environment too much, we damage ourselves. There should be no conflict between the interests of humanity and the interests of the environment. And yet so many people who resent intrusions or extra costs associated with their lifestyle moan and they say, environmentalists, the earth, as if it's somewhere they don't live. It's like sitting on an enormous branch of a tree 30 foot up and soaring through the end of that branch that's closest to the trunk of the tree and saying, well, I like doing this. And somebody says, ease off, mate, don't cut through too far through that branch. It isn't going to do you any good. And then you say, well, I don't care about this tree. It's that level of irrationality. And yet, because some people feel their freedom's threatened, of course they are, by the constant pressure these days to alter our lifestyle, then they think that their expressions of dismay or anger or their cultivated hatred of the environmental movement and its leading lights is somehow entirely justified. And they listen to Donald Trump, who's destroying the environment just about as quickly as anybody can, I think. It's not just about burning oil, it's about all the protections, the wildlife protections, the ocean reserves, where no industrial activity should take place because it's the breeding ground of this or that important aquatic creature. And we'll come on to that as a separate issue. But if we look at things like insulating homes, taxing cars which are twice as big as they need to be. Look at the average car today. Look at an old Mini from the 1960s and look at a modern one. It's not Mini at all. Some of those modern Mini models are probably as heavy as a Jaguar. Now, I wouldn't be for banning anything. I don't like those absolute rules. I mean, I'd like to be a millionaire. I'd like to be a billionaire. And I wouldn't want somebody saying, oh, you can't have a house that big. Oh, you can't have an old Aston Martin or a modern Bentley or whatever. You can't. Well, you can't have that yacht. I say, no, you can have what you like, but you are going to pay a fortune for it. So you're going to help the environmental initiatives. So what am I talking about? One rich for the poor and one for the rich. One law for the poor, one law for the rich. Well, it is a bit like that, but it's not exactly a law. All it's saying is we're not making up. We're not restricting anybody, but we're simply making you recognise the burden that you place, the stress you place on the environment. So if we had a, say, road tax on the weight of the vehicle, well, I've got a 2-ton car. All right, we all pay twice as much as that guy who's only got a 1-ton car, and 4 times as much as that guy who's only got a 1/2-ton car, or that guy who's got a motorcycle. Even my Harley doesn't weigh 1/2 ton. Somebody might make a joke about that, but it doesn't. It weighs about 1/4 ton. I don't think it's that much. 700 pounds, work it out. It's heavy. Well, I expect to pay more tax than somebody on a Honda 90. Of course I do. So let's just think about all these issues, and I'll come back and start, and I'll focus on one particular element. Please feel free, if I get it organised on my technical thing that this is going on, well, it's YouTube, to send me messages. You know, tell me if I'm talking nonsense. But don't do that, it just annoy me. Tell me if you think, you know, I'm putting my finger on the pulse of the issue and everything you hear is absolutely reasonable, because that will make me more cheerful. But you may have something to add or question to ask. Enough already for today. Jack, are you going to join us? Jack usually likes to get in on a video. Jack, would you please come here a minute and just come in and say hello? Just a minute. There we are. Oh, there we are. Now, Jack says, my butler talks nothing but perfect sense. Pay attention to him. Thank you for now. Bye for now.